Let's talk about ADHD and sex. How does one impact the other and why? Many of the struggles those with ADHD face, such as inattention, impulsive behavior, and hyperactivity, to name a few, have a sneaky way of showing up in sexual and romantic relationships that can be difficult to detect at first. If you struggle with ADHD or know someone who does, some of the behaviors we're going to discuss might seem familiar. So today we're going to explore how having ADHD can impact sex and relationships because there's some surprising connections. So let's break it down. 1. Hypersexuality and hyposexuality. People with ADHD often experience sexuality in extremes, but like a pendulum, the extremes can swing in either direction. Some may feel hypersexual, craving intensity, novelty, or stimulation. Studies show that people with ADHD report higher sexual interest and more frequent sexual behaviors compared to non-ADHD groups. It makes perfect sense since sexual stimulation triggers the release of the 4 key feel-good hormones, such as dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and oxytocin. And those with ADHD crave reward due to the lower levels of dopamine in their brain. But the opposite can also happen. Others with ADHD might feel hyposexual, the opposite of hypersexuality. And it's when a person experiences a significant loss of interest in sex, followed by a low sex drive. Why? Because ADHD comes with things like stress, emotional overwhelm, rejection sensitivity, and sensory overload, all of which can shut everything down instantly. Those who have ADHD know that the feelings of overwhelm can be mentally draining, which might lead some to avoid sex altogether. Other issues related to ADHD, such as struggling with emotional dysregulation, can make intimacy feel more draining than exciting. So if your desire swings wildly from high to low, that's actually very ADHD typical. Impulsivity and risk. Impulsivity is a common ADHD symptom, and while not present in all individuals who have ADHD, since it exists on a spectrum, it can be reflected in sexual behavior in some individuals. Research confirms that individuals with ADHD, especially those with untreated symptoms, are statistically more likely to engage in unprotected sex, casual encounters, inconsistent contraception use, or jumping into relationships quickly. In a peer-reviewed study from 2023, researchers surveyed 1,392 adults, including 541 people diagnosed with ADHD. Using an anonymous online questionnaire, the study found that both male and female adults diagnosed with ADHD engaged in riskier sexual behavior than those without. It also found that the risk was even greater in females with ADHD, such as having sex at a younger age, using contraception less often, having more sexual partners, and engaging in more infidelity, in comparison to their ADHD males and non-ADHD peers in the study. Additionally, both male and female participants with ADHD reported lower satisfaction, both overall and sexually, despite being sexually active at similar rates to others. So, what does this mean? Sex and relationships can already be challenging and stressful, but struggling with ADHD adds another layer of difficulty due to impulse control, emotional intensity, and dopamine-driven behaviors. This is exactly why many experts emphasize the importance of taking things slow, communicating intentions clearly, and practicing impulse control, along with mindfulness. Hyperfocus and fade out. Hyperfocus in individuals with ADHD manifests as an intense focus and concentration on a subject or activity that deeply interests them, which can even cross over into a state of hyperfixation and can be unhealthy. In the context of dating and relationships, this hyperfocus can make everything feel intense and euphoric, passionate, all-consuming. Sex can feel incredible in this phase because the thrill of novelty fuels dopamine. But here's the twist. That hyperfocus doesn't last forever. As the chemistry settles and routine sets in and the novelty of the other person starts to wear off, interest can fade fast. Not because the person stops caring, but because the dopamine drop hits, which can lead to confusion, emotional distance, or mismatched desire in the relationship. It can be really difficult and disappointing for the person on the receiving end to understand why the sudden whirlwind romance just faded out. However, having ADHD doesn't mean relationships are doomed from the start. With awareness, understanding, and open communication, these relationships can still thrive and grow. Inattention, sensory sensitivity, and connection. It's easy to underestimate the impact that sensory and inattention issues have on relationships for those with ADHD. This can come in the form of getting distracted during sex, having trouble staying mentally present, or feeling overwhelmed by certain touches or sensations. Not because they don't care, but because their nervous system is simply reacting differently. ADHD and sex is also a much more complex issue than you'd think. A review published in 2020 by the Journal of Sexual Medicine found that adults with ADHD often report higher sexual desire and more frequent sexual behaviors. However, they also reported lower sexual satisfaction and higher rates of sexual dysfunction compared to adults without ADHD. This gap between high sexual desire and sexual dysfunction help explain why sex and relationships can feel so difficult for people with ADHD. Because seeking thrill and novelty increases the dopamine ADHD brains are constantly craving. But keeping up is exhausting and draining. This is why communication, reassurance, and slower pacing can make a huge difference. So, what does it all mean? ADHD affects sex and relationships in dozens of subtle ways, from desire to impulsivity to emotional connection, to the rhythm and intensity of intimacy over time. But none of these patterns mean something is wrong with you. They just mean your brain works differently. And once you understand the patterns, you can work with them instead of feeling confused or ashamed by them. So if you have ADHD or know someone who does, remember, these patterns in sex and relationships are not a flaw. They're just part of how your brain works. Understanding them is the first step toward building more fulfilling connections. With patience, communication, and self-awareness, relationships can not only survive, but thrive. You're not broken, you're just wired differently. Did anything we discussed in this video resonate? Let us know what you think in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Take care.